The whole world knows the prophecy about the four horsemen of the apocalypse from the revelation of John the theologian. Riders appear after each other, carry chaos, destruction and death all over the world. The prophecy was recalled again when The Economist, which is also known for its predictions of world events, published a cover titled The World in 2019. The cover featured four horsemen of the apocalypse. Is this an accident, or has we thus been warned that the world is preparing for destruction? It is vital for us to understand this now so that the terrible prediction is not fulfilled. If you analyze the facts, you can understand that all world events and crises really have authors. And the picture on the cover is a plan of the powerful, which has already begun to be fulfilled. Who is the author of this plan? A member of the Bilderberg Club, Zbigniew Brzezinski, wrote back in 2009 about the global financial crisis. This crisis will never end until we achieve our goals. Our goals are well known to you: a single world government, and it will be formed, whether you like this idea or not. You yourself will ask us about this, because further it will only get worse and worse. This requires much more than economic paralysis. Wars, famine and epidemics around the world are needed. The Bilderberg Club includes the most influential people on the planet, representatives of the richest banking clans, that is, the world elite, globalists. It is difficult for us, the poor, to imagine that there are people who can buy everything in this world with giblets, and they can easily buy people by putting them in power. And power is the right to dispose of the fates of the world, which they seek, to reorganize the world so that they are the only rulers no longer secretly, but officially. There have always been forces in the world, and now there are forces eager for world domination, and we, the masses, at the expense of which and on whose heads they go, need to clearly understand this. According to Brzezinski, these forces are leading world crises, entire countries and peoples quarrel, owning almost all the media on the planet, creating public opinion of any scale. And the plan to destroy the world order with the help of four horsemen of the apocalypse is also their work. This is indicated by all the logic of events taking place in the world. First horseman, More. The cover shows that the riders are coming from the east. The rider More is depicted in the crown. Here is the coronavirus, which came from the east, from China, just in 2019. At the same time, the pandemic was not a pandemic according to all medical standards. It was announced in March 2020, when there were only 118,000 cases in the world, which is 0.001% of the world population. And according to scientifically developed medical standards, the epidemic is at least 5% of cases. And in the future, no supermorbidity also happened. According to medical standards, the incidence is considered according to seasons, and the number of cases for the entire year is not summed up, and even more so, for 2 years. But in violation of scientific norms, 2 years, all the sick were summed up continuously, as in one season. And even with this fraudulent form of counting, about 452 million people have had coronavirus in the world, and every year about 1 billion people get seasonal flu, that is, more than 4 times more. But for some reason, the flu pandemic is not announced. The mortality rate of coronavirus is estimated at 1 to 2%, that is, comparable to the mortality rate of influenza, and very far from the mortality rate of especially dangerous diseases that cause terrible epidemics. Up to 90% of cases die from plague, smallpox, cholera, and 98% recover from COVID. Then why did the whole world have a nightmare because of this virus for so long? Because it was necessary for this powerful world. Back in 2010, the Rockefeller Foundation published a report that accurately described everything we saw in 2020. Moreover, according to the plan, the pandemic was supposed to happen back in 2012. In 2012, a pandemic broke out. It had a deadly impact on the economy. The movement of people and goods was reduced to almost zero. Shops and office buildings were empty and remained so for months. National leaders around the world have strengthened their powers of power with a raft of restrictions and new rules, from mandatory face masks to body temperature checks. Even after the pandemic began to decline, authoritarian control and supervision of citizens did not soften and even intensified. And another representative of the world elite, Klaus Schwab, in the book COVID-19, The Great Reboot wrote, Many people ask when we will finally be able to return to normal life. In short, never. The pandemic must be used as a narrow window of opportunity to make the great reboot of the whole world. It turns out, everything as in the statement of Brzezinski. The pandemic was man-made and was needed to establish total control and a new world order. And the pandemic, as we see, was simply explicitly cancelled and removed all restrictions when the scenario turned to a special operation in Ukraine. Is this possible if there was actually an epidemic? How can a virus on command stop being scary and deadly? Second horseman of the apocalypse symbolizes the war. Now we all understand that we are talking about a military special operation in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The cover of the magazine behind the writers shows Putin's profile, followed by Pinocchio with a very long nose, meaning a very big lie. And in fact, the military conflict was played out according to plan, behind which are all the same world elite. To understand this, you need to figure out who Putin and Zelensky are. Delving into the course of events, we can with a high degree of probability assume that Putin and Zelensky were brought to power by the same world financial elite, but not the peoples. Both of them were fabulously enriched while in power, obviously, at the expense of the people, and both countries under their leadership began to collapse, peoples, to poverty. And so, when both lost their popularity, this special operation was organized, and both again became popular favorites. Judge for yourself. In Russia in 1993, a coup d'état took place, which by all indications was a special operation of the West and the CIA. Yeltsin coordinated his actions in October 1993 with Clinton, and on the eve of the White House shooting, Clinton promised Yeltsin $2.5 billion for the execution of the Supreme Council. On the streets of Moscow, soldiers of foreign states fought, who could get into the capital with weapons in their hands clearly with Yeltsin's knowledge. These are the soldiers of the 6th NATO Brigade and the Special Forces of Jericho. And people were shot in the backs by snipers from the roof of the American embassy. This was reported by eyewitnesses to the events. The CIA was created with money and with the participation of the Rockefellers. Clinton is also a Prod A tilde copyright GA tilde copyright of Rockefeller. He came to see him at the Bilderberg Club and only then became President of the United States. That is, the coup d'état occurred according to plan and with the money of banking clans. Yeltsin previously agreed on Putin's candidacy by phone with Clinton. These archives have been published. And GRU veteran Pirinov said, Putin has long been recruited by the West and, apparently, has become the largest project of the Western Special Services. According to a similar scenario, Zelensky came to power. In 2014, a coup d'état took place in Ukraine, Maidan. There is evidence that the Maidan was paid by the United States at $1 million per day. Both in Moscow in 1993 and in Kiev in 2014, unknown snipers shot both civilians and policemen in the backs. After the coup, Poroshenko became president. Then he was replaced by Zelensky, who had just a dizzying career, from a comedy actor to the president of the country. Is this possible for an ordinary person? We all know how secret elections are orchestrated. That is, both of these people, as we see, were in power according to the same scenario, which is followed by the hands of globalists. And now they are doing the will of their masters. The third horseman is already ready, hunger. He slowly begins his path across the planet and through our countries. The UN has already warned that the conflict in Ukraine could lead to rising food prices and hunger around the world. Moreover, hunger is also man-made. Politicians, there are no other prerequisites for it in the world. Unprecedented economic sanctions are announced against Russia, and all this is done at the same time, harmoniously and as if in concert. In the West, our gold and foreign exchange reserves are blocked, which in fact should, according to all common principles of farming, be kept at home, in the country, and not overseas. We were robbed, and this threatens the country with complete collapse. After all, after 1993, the ruble completely depends on the dollar. How much currency there is in the country, so much we can print rubles. Therefore, blocking reserves is the collapse of our financial system. In the restoration of independence, contrary to the brave assurances of propaganda, will take years. How will the people live in this case? Sanctions kill the economy not only of Russia, but of the whole world. The world remains without fertilizers, cement, oil and gas, because politicians prohibit them from Russia to buy. For the peoples of all countries, sanctions are price increases, the ruin of small businesses, unemployment and hunger. They are not scary only to the same globalists and multinationals, who will simply absorb everyone who went broke. Many sensible figures are against sanctions, because they are not ruining Russia, but the whole world. But the financial elite and puppet leaders of the sanctions stubbornly push, as they pushed into the pandemic, the mask regime and general injection. The handwriting is absolutely the same, because the author of the events is one. Fourth writer, death. Obviously, the collapse of the economy, hunger, military conflict will lead to mass deaths. And this, as it turns out, was also planned by the world elite. British intelligence officer John Coleman, who had access to the intelligence archives, described their plans in his book Committee 300. At least 4 billion useless eaters will be exterminated through limited wars, organized epidemics of deadly diseases and famine. And the final of the New World Order should look like this: the undivided power of a bunch of elites, in their hands all the wealth and resources, the population is significantly reduced, and the rest exist on the position of disenfranchised slaves in a digital concentration camp. John Coleman found in the archives the following goals of globalists building a new world order: a single world government and a uniform monetary system will be governed by permanent unelected hereditary oligarchs. There will be no middle class, only rulers and servants. The masses will be reduced to the level of trained animals, easily subordinated and managed. The elite will not have any cash on hand. All calculations will be carried out using a card on which the owner's identification number will be printed. Any person who violates the rules will be punished by blocking his card. And here's what Klaus Schwab writes: state borders will be destroyed. The question of world government is at the heart of all issues. The economy must be centrally managed by giant monopolies. Private property will die. Its place will be taken by the economy of use and participation, that is, only rental of goods, but not ownership of them. Money is only digital, which is owned by the central bank, and he may or may not allow them to be used. Robotization everywhere. No industry will remain unaffected. For the remaining people, no independent earnings, only a fixed allowance from the state and only for loyalty to the government. Digitalization of all spheres of life. A system for controlling the behavior and movement of people, using artificial intelligence. So, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse published on the cover of the magazine is not an accident, but a plan of the world elite, which we were all informed about in encrypted form. We are presented with all world events as accidental, so, they say, it turned out. But they have authors who usually hide behind the scenes. So, World Wars I and II were carefully planned by Anglo-Saxon bankers, and provocations to start wars were played as performances. And now all events taking place since 2020 are clearly controlled from one source, and they must lead to a deadly final for the majority of the world's population. We, the peoples of all countries of the world, need to understand the meaning of what is happening and see the third force behind the screen. The dissemination of truthful information is the primary task, because most people are blinded by the illusions of the media, which are also concentrated in the hands of globalists and show the deceived masses only what is necessary to implement the scenario. Organizing the popular media and passing the truth from hand to hand is our first step. The next step is to unite ordinary citizens of countries and build Soviets in their countries to implement the principle of democracy. After all, trust in the presidents, who, as we see, fulfill the fascist plans of the globalists by all indications, cannot be